All right, hello and welcome to GLOBEBUSTERS Season 14, Episode 13. Today, ManofStone is going to be walking us through his interpretation of the ether and how electricity and magnetism works. Should be a very interesting Prezi. There's a lot of, even in the mainstream, it's very uh, there's a lot of experiments that give contradictory answers, and there's no real cohesive answer to how a magnet works. It's actually pretty crazy. Maybe at the end here, we'll watch Richard Feynman take a crack at it, see how it compares to Stone's answer. All right, so Stone, whenever you are ready, my good sir, we can screen share and get you in.
All right. Hey, gang, everybody. Thanks for coming. All righty. Well, then let's bring up a few docs here. And let's share one of them. Perhaps this one. All right. How's that looking?
Looking good.
You guys are seeing all that? Okay.
Is there any way you could make it smaller and harder to read in full screen?
Well, I will try to keep things a little more zoomed in there, just so that you're seeing what's necessary.
Fantastic.
We'll get there. All righty. Over to the text. So I actually spent quite a few hours in review and pre-preparation of this presentation, and I found myself asking, what hasn't already been said is the thematic question for me when I was putting this material together. So while I was circling the wagons and considering that question, I was able to string together a few thoughts which relate to a spread of electromagnetic concepts. And I think the combination of a few of them, when seen side by side in succession, might help one get a better grip on how I see the electromechanical world in which we live. So in starting that train of thought, let's follow up with a reiteration of some of my response to a presentation recently given by Colin on Discord, aka Angling Alchemist, regarding the Faraday unipolar paradox, or so as it is presented or titled. And that comes down to this cool diagram here. So what we're looking at here are three scenarios regarding the wire contact brushes that are connected to the edge and the axis of a conductor spinning on an axle, along with a magnet of roughly the same shape, magnetized across the plane perpendicular to the axis of spin. So they're visually presented in the form of a logical expression, what you're looking at here, one to the next, alternating which of the two elements is spinning. So here, just the bottom one, here both, here just the top. It's pretty straightforward in which ones are producing EMF. And the first point that occurs to me about how it appears is what they're trying to say here is that whether the magnet is spinning is irrelevant, that you're only showing EMF produced when the conductor is spinning. It asserts that the EMF is only there in those two cases. And my issue is that we so rarely see anyone quantify just how much EMF is produced in those first two cases. So I think that's quite likely because in the lab, we aren't able to consistently produce perfectly homogeneous conductor materials in regard to their hysteretic value, nor are we able to consistently magnetize a disk perfectly through its middle, precisely against its level plane. As a result, EMF is produced only because of the imperfections in the materials used in the lab. This is telling us that the flux lines coming out of the magnet aren't being cut by anything at a significant angle. And after all, this is how EMF is produced in the practical machines that we use in everyday life. This, as I see it, really isn't a unipolar paradox. This is a distraction away from the critical parts of the geometry which are lacking in this setup. So in some of the papers that we've covered on reading night on Discord, Ether cause. Over the past year and some, we see the odd scientist taking the time to build something and show some real figures. You know, A.G. Kelly spent tens of watts only on spinning up his motor to move the conductor and was able to pull out a single microwatt through the conductor. That's 1/1,000,000th of a single watt while spending tens of watts on spinning it just to get that power. So that's kind of how I see what's going on there. Another example of that is what happened with the Marinov motor, which we're looking at here. The torque that the guys who replicated this on paper the torque that they were harvesting hit the mark at about 105 dyne centimeters per amp. So not a lot of people understand what that means. So what it does equate to is about 1/130,000th of a foot-pound of torque. And a foot-pound is application of 1 pound of force applied to the wrench, so to speak, at a radius of 1 foot. I see this entire diagram as one big set of distractions away from what truly matters in motor and generator design. And that starts with how the electrical ring is chosen to be the rotor and the magnet is the stator fixed in the lab, so to speak. So spinning the ring, making that choice to do that, means one has to use electrical contact brushes or mercury contacts just to make the electrical connection to the ring. And that means that one also has to electrically insulate the bearings, which are used to float the ring so that it can spin. And in the much cheaper option of using brushed contacts, you're bringing friction to that ring and impeding its ability to spin. So as a side note, since the magnet has no connections at all to anything else, I found myself asking why not spin the magnet. The exchange of forces would be the same between the two when the magnet is in this orientation relative to the ring's split current path. Sure it will. But spinning the magnet as an option means that it's also possible to chart the torque in all orientations of the magnet relative to the ring current flow. So as you change this, you get different torque based on orientation of where the splits occur. Note the term B flux used right here. That is not something that comes from a magnet. That would be an M flux. And a B field is electromagnetically generated and exists outside of the conduit that created it, not to mention perpendicular. Speaking of which, there is a B field produced here, which is not shown in this diagram. The single turn of wire going from the battery to the ring and around back to the battery itself is, in the strictest sense, a single turn inductor. It would produce a north polarity perpendicular to the path of this loop, coming toward the left and out of the page. There would be a north coming out this way. And you'll see the geometric rule behind that coming up in a sec on another page. So that inductive loop would only be exerting a force on the bottom half of the magnet. But the force would probably result in some torque, since both polarities within the magnet exist down here. I would guess a bit of counterclockwise torque, with north being repelled from the north up here and the south being attracted to it up here. At this phase, we would be getting induced counterclockwise spin. But I digress. The toroidal magnet here is supposed to have 2 norths and 2 souths in it, balanced and in static position. Yet it's supposed to be circulating this B flux within it, and that's somehow supposed to interact with the current going around it, right on past parallel to 2 of its block lines. Now, block lines are where there is the least influence in any polar direction. You got north, you got south, and then you got this right here, where there's a whole lot of nothing going on. Zero flux, so to speak. And the other two block lines in this magnet are at 6 and at 12 o'clock. Again, the wire loop is where you're going to find the B field on this machine. And as a final point, I would say that this diagram also raises an eyebrow when we look at the term 2I to represent all of the current going through a single conductor. This should merely be I. And this should be 1/2 I, because it's going around the ring this way and going around that way, and you assume resistance is the same between the two, that they would carry half of the current each way. You know what I mean? Path of least resistance rules applying. But again, I'm digressing a bit here. So this is a frame of the flyby animation that I created in SolidWorks. So when I was designing and 3D printing the parts that I did up in my own replication of Maranov's work. So using steel bearings, little steel ball bearings right here with an outside diameter of 5 millimeters, just to give you a grip on how small those bearings really are, I was able to get this thing to turn over, just to get it to turn over against its own out of counterbalance weight in terms of the rotor, while spending 300 watts running current around it through the split ring like you saw in the previous. And that, believe it or not, is roughly the same result, or roughly the same amount of energy or torque harvestable here as the rest of the gang got on all the papers that we read. And that is because of the geometry that's being invoked here in the design itself. Speaking of which, let's move on to how things are thought of and done in the practical world, just to give you a better grip on the parameters I'm looking at in analysis of what we've seen up until now. So there's the mechanism right there. That's the B field we're talking about, that's generated typically using coil-based geometry. This diagram represents what's called the right-hand rule. The current going from positive to ground or negative moves in the direction in which the fingers are pointing while gripping on the tube right here. That's the important part of the mechanism. What matters is that the current direction is exactly what we're looking at here. And if the positive were on the left and the negative or ground was on the right, and we wound this coil, we would wind it counterclockwise as we're going across, such that the current going through the wire on the front side of this coil is going up in both cases. That will produce the north out the left side of the tube. Conversely, there is what's called, okay, let me back it up 1 point. What we're really talking about here is, like I said, this is the electromagnetic process, in that electricity is applied, magnetic polarity is produced. So conversely, I should say, there is what we call the magnetoelectric process, which is the reciprocal precisely of what this is. And that is what we find going on inside generators and alternators, generators being DC or AC in design, and alternators typically built as an AC device, and they also frequently come with a DC rectifier tacked on the outside of the body of the alternator itself. So keeping in mind that we're going in this orientation in terms of the right-hand rule, this is what we're going to be applying 2 additional pages. So here is your classic cheapo mainstream diagram where we're spinning a magnetic rotor, which has 4 dipoles inside it, cross-mounted, but only half of each dipole interacts with the stator part of the machine. This will be the north of this half of the dipole, and the rest of them are not labeled at all. They all meet in the middle. So the question is, how much of this diagram is really telling you about the orientation of the stator? The answer is nothing other than how the windings are suggesting forward current for 2 of them and backward current for 2 of them. It doesn't show you the real geometry behind what's actually creating the power. In fact, the coil symbols themselves are 90 degrees out from their actual physical orientation in the machine. those 4 outside arrows are actually a product of each polarity, the magnet polarity, in proximity to each stator coil. The outside arrows are just showing the current direction induced. The spin direction of the machine is irrelevant. And the following two images, the following 2 images that I put together will demonstrate that. So let's just look at one of them first. Case A, if you will. You can see it right there.
Dude, you made
This is a
some
real
awesome
represent.
diagrams.
You like that, puppy?
You made all these. These are awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, I like to do my own. You know, I mean, I'm never really happy with what I find. You know, this is out of the textbook, right? That's fugly,
Yeah,
in my opinion.
Yeah, that one looks gross. And then when I saw the high quality one, I was like, "That's a stone man-made one."
It looks sadly inadequate, does it not? So, anyways, okay, thank you. I do appreciate that. So here's case A, and what we're seeing here is that the magnets, with each centered on a stator column, the way that it is, they polarize the columns, each according to their own polarity, outward facing in extension. So, for example, this north one would have a north pointing outward. So in terms of the orientation, magnetically speaking, of the stator, north is also pointing outward through the core itself. And as the strength of the magnetic flux going through the cores increases and then decreases with spin, current is produced in the turns of the conductors. Okay? The axis of the magnet swinging toward and then aligning with and then swinging past each stator coil. The geometry is the opposite of what happens in the unipolar paradox machine if in this position and in this position, and zero current would be created. That's the final on that follow the bouncing ball kind of thing. So ultimately, at this point of rotation, the power comes out of the machine in the polarity shown at the lower right. Follow the positive into the machine up to the 3 o'clock position, where the current through the wire is coming up over the top and then outward towards us and then down across the front. Using the right-hand rule, you can see that this orientation is caused by the north field going out. This is why we have positive coming this way. It is congruous with the right-hand rule as I'm describing it. So if you check the other 3, you will find the same relation. Since they're all congruous, you add their induced voltages together when calculating the output total. So let's deal with these little outside arrows now. These little guys are a tertiary thing, typically integrated into this type of design. The magnetic flux coming out of each stator coil and the column is conducted out and around from north to south in each direction as one physical piece of material. So the pink and the gray, I guess it's kind of an orangey and the gray here, are actually one piece of the same material, the way that this stator is cast. And keep in mind that this is a cross section that we're looking at here. And the magnets, as well as the stators, come well out of the page toward you and go well into the page relative to the radius that we see here of their particular sizes. So the second frame is the opposite polar state of the output, as you can see here. Now at the 3 o'clock position, with positive coming from 12 o'clock, you know what I mean, and all the way around positive coming from 12 o'clock, you can see the wires coming out the bottom towards us and upwards across its face this time. So in the outer shell, as a result, these arrows are backward to what you see in the other polarity as well. So we have positive coming out of the wire instead of negative, and things are moving from this north to this south and this north to those souths, instead of the other way around here, where we had the norths at 3 and 9, moving to the souths at 6 and 12. Hope that makes sense. So while we're looking at those little arrows on the outside, I wanted to take us into the atypical world just for a moment or 3 here. What I don't see in this design of alternator is any way to harvest the changes in magnetic flux here in the material wall outside the cores. And every time I look at this machine, I'm reminded of a very rare video I saw long ago, uploaded by John Bedini. It was about an American soldier who had found a piece of German machinery during the Second World War. And it was a pull start generator that didn't require input power, you know what I mean, to keep it turning after the point of pull starting it. The guy's name was Kromrey, Kromrey, for anybody who wants to do some real digging through history and find that video. And he, when he got home from the war, he put a company together to produce them, mass produce them and sell them. And in order to do that, he used the mentally infirm and compartmentalized their tasks, just like another organization we're all familiar with, so that no one could ever copy his work by questioning the people who made the parts while under his roof. Each of his production staff were fairly mentally retarded, and in an assortment of ways based on the tasks that he needed to, you know, to get done in order to produce the product.
So you're saying they're all in on it, Stone?
Yeah, they're all totally retarded, and they're all totally in on it. And it's really funny reading the interviews of the people who did the digging, because I mean, you've got to concede that this is just an amazing, impossible, violating the second law kind of device. So people want to know how to reproduce them naturally. So they all tried to, you know, interview his staff, and it was, I don't know, it's just amazing reading the aftermath of that, the printed stories that turned out after those interviews were conducted. Really entertaining stuff. I don't know, just a sight to behold in terms of the development of science in general for terms of consumer use. So the difference in his design is found in the use of capacitor plates on either side of these little arrows going through the material, along with a few other tricks like custom cutting the size of his commutator brushes to something very non-standard. So you couldn't just go to the store and grab some more and keep using the machine. You know what I mean? It was just a little piece of information or innovation, a piece of innovation for you guys to consider. So when we get down to it, this here is the waveform that they would have you believe is coming out of this machine, the regular old alternator. The correct aspect of it is that the voltage is highest in each polar direction. This part they got right, where the magnets are centered over each stator column, highest concentration of lines of flux coming out of the center of the magnet, going through the center of the coil. This part of the process is the part which I think is overlooked by most people, is in regard to the inductive formula itself. The pertinent variable in producing this amplitude is the rate of change of magnetic saturation, not merely the peak Gauss value. This is why Tesla, excuse me, this is why Tesla was so busy creating brush commutator versions of this, where he was driving the switching speed as high as he possibly could. And as a part of mapping the curve produced in the resultant inductive formula, just to see if the relation between the variables changes with very high rate of change in the magnetic saturation of the coil and its core. Hope that makes sense. But the approach to peak voltage isn't like this here. The approach rather to this peak voltage is not as sinusoidal as they would have you believe. It actually looks a lot more like this one here. And all I did here, really, in terms of color, was just to emphasize the polarity of the current as a function of the polarity of the magnet hitting each coil, as wound in the previous images, just to keep that clear. So what you're seeing is that when it's right over center, that's really where you're getting, you know, the business in terms of amplitude. So let's move from induction to capacitance. All right. So when we were up here with the inductor, the process revolves around the B field, which is generated as electrical current is sent through the coil. And mainstream does not really spend a lot of space in the high school books or the undergrad textbooks speaking to the issue of precisely how that energy is going through the conductor and then turns into something magnetic and dipolar. They just kind of breeze past that. It's like, oh yeah, that happens. That's part of the process, but they don't talk about the mechanics at all. And the same issue arises when talking about where the electrical energy, which is sent to a capacitor, actually goes while it is being, quote, stored. So if you haven't seen the half a dozen videos on YouTube currently showing somebody dismantling a large scale capacitor, swapping the dielectric material into another capacitor setup, and then discharging it, I'd strongly recommend you guys look that up. It's amazing to see. More so, it raises this very question, where the energy goes while the dielectric material is removed from between the two plates and then reassembled. Besides that, I'd like to cover something else I see happening inside the capacitor while it's charged up.
We will definitely watch a dissectable capacitor thing at the end. That's an
yeah,
awesome
for sure. That's worthy of some time. I think if you want to spend some time and look that up while I'm still yakking away here. I'm almost half done, if you can believe it. It's a pretty straight up kind of presentation. So this here is the classic image of a capacitor you see in all the mainstream textbooks, and it shows two main variables in calculation of just how much charge, or Q, you happen to have there in between these two places at any given time, and that is the area and the separation distance of these plates. Notice that it shows a positive and negative at the battery, meant to show its polarity in the circuit, right? But it also labels the plates as positive and negative Q. This is part of the seeding of the young impressionable mind with the idea of negative charge when there isn't actually any such thing. Instead, think of those two as the charged plate connected to the battery's positive and the ground plate connected to the other polarity of the battery. And it doesn't matter what you call it. Charge only ever does one thing. It seeks resolution through passage to and into the ground. There is charged and there's not charged. And even the not charged thing is merely less charged than the charged. It's a question of how much your rig, or how much of your rig, I should say, is floating. And that's a term typically invoked in a circuit, an electrical circuit, which makes use of multiple voltages at the same time, or a circuit that has no connection to a physical ground. The negative end of things is merely the place in the circuit with the lowest level of charge. So they call that the least voltage, usually using a 0 or a ground symbol to denote it. So I'd like to show you two things that I see when I'm looking at this diagram. Firstly, I notice that it's oriented the way things, or I should say it isn't. It isn't oriented the way things are when looking at a typical schematic circuit. In a schematic diagram, positive is upward, negative is downward in terms of how we see current flow in the interconnecting lines. And I think that this diagram's orientation was not so arbitrarily set. Like there was a reason for that. And here it is. Let me just get that a little bigger for you guys. And then up at that. So you're just looking at that. Okay, so there it is with positive upward for both the battery and, more importantly, for the plates. I've also relabeled the bottom plate with a big old G for ground and leaving the nomenclature argument aside. Let's cover all the lines in between the plates. Here, they're not even labeled. They just got cute little arrows on them. However, you'll find them typically referred to as electric lines of force or field lines. What we're actually looking at there is an electrostatic field. That's what a capacitor is. Static, meaning unchanging, holding, or storing a charge. And my cat to go right on by. See you later. Notice that the lines are evenly spread out and they're all the same thickness top to bottom. Okay, we on the surface of the Earth live in a field just like this one here. This is the famous diagram from Feynman's textbook. I can speak, I really can. Somebody told me I can. So this diagram, Feynman, he put out a textbook, and everybody has seen this, repeatedly used in various flat Earth video topics. Coming away from the ground, the ambient voltage in the air increases at 100 volts per meter upward. And that same thing is going on inside every typical capacitor. So why is there nothing in the mainstream diagrams to indicate this phenomenon? Of course, it would tip humans off as to the truth about where we live. They would then begin to ask some very revealing questions, which the mainstream would have a pretty tough time admitting that they just don't have those kinds of answers. And the model would have to be officially thrown out per the commandment of Feynman himself regarding how we treat an incorrect hypothesis. Does that sound familiar, gang?
Dude, they talk such a big game on throwing things out while they're under the guise of using unlimited coefficients and free parameters to make their model match experimental measurement. And they're like, guys, if you have something that doesn't match, you got to throw it out. But us, no, we'll just introduce a new thing and we're good to go.
We just hit it with better math.
The only thing they actually throw out are the fundamental building blocks of physics, like wave theory. Those you can throw out. You can get it around, but everything else we're gonna keep.
Get out the ping pong balls, boys. We're going to talk about photons. That's right. So anyways, all that said, I think this is how the diagram should look at the bare minimum. You know what I'm saying? It should indicate the increase in voltage potential or the charge in the field itself relative to the ratio of distance to ground.
No, wait a minute, Stone. Are you trying to tell me that the one positively charged plate isn't overflowing and spilling little tiny electron balls onto the other plate?
I don't think so, bro. I don't think so. Dude, I don't see anybody who's ever caught one of those balls. So nope.
Is this in relationship? So like gravity works with the inverse to the square of the distance, right? Is this the inverse or the same?
It's exactly like this. It's about charge potential. I guess that is the inverse. No, you're right. Shane, when it comes to that question, how much data do we have at 50,000 feet regarding small g?
I don't know. What I mean? I was immediately thinking of the two formulas and the similarities, and I was like,
we don't have any.
How I think it would look, though.
No, the point is that all of that, again, is just mainstream assertion based on assumption and presumption about mass attracting mass, and it's all about R squared. And if that's true, then on Earth it must be that as we go higher, there's going to be less G. But I've never seen the data. I don't know if you have, but I've never seen it. You know? So, okay. In a concession, I would say that I may not even have this shape right. You know what I mean? Maybe this increase isn't that linear in reality. And I've only drawn 6 cones here. Maybe instead they should increase in diameter to the extent where 6 of them completely cover the area of the top plate by the time these shapes increase in diameter. You know what I mean? That they would cover the whole thing.
Yeah.
Geometrically, that could be a lot closer to the truth of what's going on here. Just to try and establish some geometric relation between the diagram and reality. You know what I mean? And I think on the other side, I think I've got it right that as we approach ground, it goes to 0. That part I think I'm nailing with this diagram. But again, it's just how far the mainstream does not go in portraying this concept that I think is a massive disservice to anybody in school paying for this information. So in any case, these are some things I'd like to have on the table when I talk about ether in regard to what it is as well as what it is not. So in both examples I'm showing here, one inductive and one capacitive, I've been pointing at a concept of what I call where to put it. And that is the energy involved in these two processes. And the term that I invoke is one that is promoted, among others, by Eric Dollard. And to me, that guy makes a lot of sense very nearly all of the time. You know what I mean? And the term that he uses here is counter space. Now, in the case of electromagnetic induction, I see the current in the coil exerting pressure on counter space in its encouragement of that same dimension or set of dimensions to create and propagate that B field. The exchange is purely energy-based, electrically sourced, and magnetically propagated. So those are the three, I guess, operators you need to keep in your head in terms of the mechanics. So, and in the case of the electrostatic charge, which is what you inclusively find in between two electrically charged conductive plates like this, the voltage applied to the positive plate exerts a force on counter space proportional to its orientation and distance to the ground plate in close proximity. The force that it applies to counter space is proportional in the way that magnets exhibit a stronger attraction with a decrease in distance. And the effect is the subsequently formed electrostatic field. And the higher the voltage, the shorter the distance between the plates, the more likely an arc will occur. And at that moment, some or all of the charge will resolve to ground almost instantaneously at the speed of light, you might say. So the punchline here is that I don't see ether playing a part in any of that. And that takes us to a third modality of electromagnetic mechanism, and that is light propagation. I'm sure you guys have been waiting to hear about that. So I'm drawing a picture
light
here.
propagation.
Totally. So I'm drawing a picture here where this process also interacts with counter space in how an oscillating point charge at very high frequency sends energy outward radially. And in a certain narrow spread of frequencies, we can see it happening in what we call the visible band of light. So I see this kind of energy propagation more as a ripple in a 3D pond effect, as counter space is perturbed outwardly from the point of charge according to the amplitude of its oscillation. Feel free to substitute the word radiation at any point here, because light radiates, and I don't see ether as necessarily present in permitting that process to manifest in real space, regardless of the density of the space through which it propagates. Hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, punch rewind, listen to it a few times, and maybe it'll make more sense. I'm sure that the regulars here watching this live stream right now are quite familiar with how the anisotropy of light has been proven many times over using interferometers of various kinds. And along with that, there is a clear absence of data which might confirm the validity of the heliosexual model. They just aren't getting shifts in the interference patterns to suggest that we're moving at 30 kilometers per second around the sun. And that's just for starters. I want to leave that all on the table right there as a single point. I also very rarely see any mention of the other alleged speeds the Earth and the rest of the solar system are supposed to be going, both in relation to spinning around our galaxy as well as the speed of our galaxy is allegedly going. You know what I mean? Just going around the galaxy, our solar system is supposed to be doing Mach 675, 30 degrees oblique from the axis of the solar ecliptic. You know what I mean? Okay. we're just not seeing that.
I can give you some context on the galactic velocities that they try to sweep up. So you know how there's a correct way to interpret the fringes by squaring the distance of them or measuring the
against
actual
square root of light.
Yep, we're actually measuring the frequency change and like getting the beat frequency from that. So, um, since that since doing that doesn't yield the 30 kilometers a second, what they'll do is they'll reinterpret how to read a fringe and just combine them and make a bigger fringe and go, if I add these together, the square of that comes out to be like 700 kilometers a second, boys. I think we made it. And it's like when you see that, it's just like, yeah, but now you're contradicting like a regular Sagnac gyro. Like they're so lost in trying to get it to work. But yeah, that's why you don't see it, and that's why it's not accepted, because it's a completely invalid interpretation that is basically just like customizing it to fit however you want it to.
You know, I remember you mentioning a little bit of that regarding Dufour and Prunier last night when you gave your presentation on invariance. And unless I'm mistaken, the diagram that you brought up actually is asymmetrical in terms of the light path going around down onto the spinning disk, that there's an extra mirror over here in the DEF, but over here it's just GH, JK, and back to M. You know what I mean?
Yeah, they actually split it
that's
between
how they
two
did
detectors.
That's how they did it. They started with a dissonant, you know what I mean, a dissonant state. And they started with interference before they even moved it. You know what I mean?
No.
I thought that was rather sleight of handish.
No, what do you mean?
Oh, okay. In that paper, they show the original concept of where the light is coming off the wall, is split, comes down, hits the two that orient the light horizontally across the disk that is spinning, and it goes through all the mirrors and then over to the receiver, you know what I mean? And then it's read through the lenses.
Oh, sorry, real quick. They split they had it set up where they could have a detector on the table too and one on the wall to compare the two.
Sure. Yeah. But I'm just talking path of light. In the ideal machine, they show first diagram is where it just comes down, and on each side of the disk, the light does the same dance through the same number of mirrors symmetrically, and then comes to the recombiner and the lenses to read it at the center of the material still on the disk, right? But then they say, oh, well, that was actually a problem because of the sensitivity, because of the range, because of the speed, because of the thing, because of the length of the, because we don't really get the ranges and the indicators that we want to be able to see, so we can get our measurements correctly made. So we added a mirror over here. So the light travel path is a different length on this side of the machine that's spinning than this side of the machine that's spinning before it is recombined. And they start that paragraph with, in bold, the machine we actually built. You should check that.
Yeah, you know? in the first configuration, one of the mirrors was blocking it, so it didn't work that way. So they had to use, like, the diagram that they show is for like simplicity, but the configuration, was different, but still should have been symmetrical or whatever.
Weird, totally weird. Just struck me as ultimately suspicious from the get-go. That's all I'm saying there. Yeah. Okay, so in turn, a barrage of theories then emerge.
You catch everything, bro. You can't get nothing by you, dude. Every time dude, that is incredible. Oh man, you're awesome, dude. I love that you like pick that up out of the slide while I'm going over it. Like your attention to detail.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that, Alan. That's cool. So back to what we're talking about here with the spinning around the galaxy and the light propagation thing, the anisotropy thing, and the heliosexual model thing. In turn, a barrage of theories then emerge out of this lack of satisfactory data in attempt to attribute cause for the readings that everybody is consistently getting out of their equipment. And this is where the aspect of ether, what it does in a light propagation scenario, becomes relevant, finally. So a while back, I did a pretty quick review of the 2002 Galev paper we did on a reading night one night. It was called The Measuring of Ether Drift Velocity and Kinematic Ether Viscosity Within Optical Waves Band. I'm sure you guys remember that one. It was kind of fun.
Remember that one, yeah.
Yeah, so in that paper, Galev takes his measurements here in 3 locations around Kharkov in the Ukraine, all at or near 200 meters above sea level. He set up his machine at some different heights, like 5 and 15 feet above the ground. And he also used a brick building at one point to get his apparatus up to closer to about 100 feet off the ground. And by the end of it all, he arrives at the point where he claims that the ether flux is coming at him from an azimuth of around 7.5 degrees south of due west at an elevation angle of 65 degrees above the horizon. And he cites a lot of averaging to get that done, while only sampling for about 8% of the 4 or 5 months during which he was operating this experiment. Here's a little zoom in, because you like to see him bigger. Excuse me. So, 8%, yes, and all that is happening right at about 50 degrees north. And all of his figures align with those of the figures who came before him in their papers. He got velocities of between 6 and 8.5 kilometers per second. I even give him credit in his design where he can change the angle of the entire table itself to the tune of some 10 degrees away from horizontal. So kudos for that, Mr. Kelly. That was, or Gallup, I should say. That was some good work. But there are obvious limitations in the altitude where measurements can be taken. And I'll submit that nobody has data for much higher altitudes than that. And I mention this out of regard for countless conclusions which have been drawn around the presumption that ether wind comes from space, that it is something more present elsewhere in the cosmos, and Earth is just flying through it, causing drag and other phenomena. So this is, again, where I disagree with their presumptions. And I use that word out of the outright fact that no one has measured anything to do with how ether allegedly affects the rate of light propagation in places other than on the surface of the Earth. I'm thinking that we can observe the effects of ether on something like the jet stream, with regard to the amazing speeds those winds achieve, as well as the cyclic change in the patterns of its direction of movement over the Earth. So let's bug over to this little page right here, page 13. What's about?
Well said. And if I could add to the azimuth readings real quick, it appears that Gallup made the same mistake that that Miller did when trying to plot it against, celestial coordinates to get that direction of motion through the cosmos, because his azimuth lines up with Miller's. But the James Demio, if you're familiar with him, he actually found that Miller miscalculated it. I forget the specifics, but it was basically he came up with 180 degrees opposite of that, essentially going in a different direction. So yeah, when it comes in terms of like trying to put a source to it in space or whatever, that's like directionality wise, I don't think it's possible to do it, but they need it to be in a certain direction, corresponding to how they interpret the celestial coordinates. And then on the jet stream, go ahead.
Yeah, real quick. So a globularist would interpret Earth spin going one way, and an etherist says the sky spins the opposite. That could be what's happening here, right? They're trying to go with one versus the other.
I guess. But with what you said about DeMeo right there, instinctively, in listening to it, first impression, I'd be thinking something went wrong in the lab and he flipped the polarity of 2 wires and didn't notice. You know what I mean? Because then he's going to get opposite polar readings, and that's how he'll think that it's coming from the other direction. And instinctively, that would be my response without actually looking at it.
Yeah, and that would be the only way you could really get a direct 180 flip from the other reading. So as if you just inverted it.
Yeah.
And then on the jet streams, real quick, something that Dr. Bennett pointed out the other day is that the jet streams, they say that the causal mechanism for them is, the temperature from the sun, like that radiation's kind of pushing the heat and all that, and causing.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, but then that's just one proposed mechanism. But then on the other side of the Earth, when it's nighttime and it's not facing the sun, the velocity
still doing 200 plus miles an hour.
Still the exact same. So on the face of it, right there, mechanistically, that's a thermodynamic violation. That's a no-fly zone for them. And so, like, totally Bennett's theory is that there's through different altitudes, there's different bands of ether that are facilitating that. Yeah,
exactly. Like you said, different altitudes, different bands of ether, different influences, different strata, and it's a question of different strata of what. that we really need to get down to brass tacks on. So back to this particular image, and that ties in directly. Nice segue. Thanks, Alan. That here we're all quite familiar with the idea of the ambient magnetic field that covers Earth. You know what I mean? Everybody is fluent in how a compass works. This here, we're looking at simple red for north and blue for south, and we're ignoring the declination map altogether for simplicity. You know what I mean? That we can at least agree that there's a magnetic dipole scenario that's measurable on Earth. And at this point, I've drawn out for you a parallel between the operation of a capacitor and the ambient electrostatic field also covering the Earth. So we're going to take it straight to page 14 with this cute little diagram here. Now, this is where I suggest that ether is composed of an ambient set of forces which cover the Earth. The mainstream show us pretty pictures like this one here. We have stable as well as wavy. I love how those are not opposites. Did anybody catch that? That
They look not
You know what I mean?
dissimilar to one another.
those adjectives are not opposites. Unstable should be over here, not wavy. You know what I mean? But I mean, that just may tip somebody off about what's really going on, so you can't use that word. But anyways, the mainstream shows all this, and we have stable and wavy, and this is all about the cycle of the change in its movement style. So let's also leave to the side the issue that this image shows you nothing about the predominant direction that jet streams actually go. And that is eastward, allegedly outrunning the spin of the Earth. But how much have you heard from the mainstream in explanation of the cause of this cyclic change in direction? And I'm thinking, not very much. Just a guess. You know what I'm saying?
Never met her.
Case resting on that test right there. So here's another one you guys are probably quite familiar with. Okay, and that's an AE projection of the jet stream, and that's from bobwins.com. It's from around the 25th of October, and I'd like to propose a scenario regarding cause for how we see it in this fairly wavy state on this particular day. And I don't think that the cyclic causal influence comes from space per se. You know what I mean? Yeah, there's a large body of data which points to sidereal relation in the timing change in azimuthal direction of the ether wind itself. But I'm pretty sure you guys can guess by now that I'm seeing things a little differently than that. You know what I mean? So
no, you have to have the same worldview as me, or we can't be friends.
You must. It's yeah, exactly. It's groupthink or get out. Totally. So personally, I see a possible relation between the relative angle between the sun, the North Pole, and the moon as the two rotate above us, and like the relationship between all that and the stability and the direction of the jet streams they're taking on any particular day. Here we see the moon on day 4 of its 29.5-day cycle as it fails to keep up with the rate of motion of the sun. And the angle between them and the North Pole at this point is about 48 degrees. And this image is a composite of most of the elements that I've highlighted up to this point in the presentation. The magnetic here is also shown red in the north, blue in the south, you know, but I think it shows the electrostatic net effect in its influence on jet stream direction without actually showing the shape of the electrostatic force that is inclusively causing it. And
what about the motion of the sun and the moon? Wouldn't that be a cause?
Well, yes and no. It's not just the motion of them, but it's their angular relationship between and their change coming in and out in a very astrological set of ways, you know, because they talk about conjunct and they talk about squaring, or I forget all the terms astrological for the different types of transit and the angles that are, you know, hexed or dodecahexed or whatever. I forget them, doesn't matter, but I'm sure you know what I'm talking about if anybody has studied any astrology They understand that they talk about transits and the angles between this celestial body and that celestial body in the sky as you look at the chart. So the final element here is the toroidal aspect of the ambient electrostatic field across the surface of the Earth. And that's what I think this is looking like here. That if we take a toroid, right, and we seat it, half of it above the surface and half of it below, and then we draw the lines of flux the same way that Rodin did in his coils, we can see how all of these influences, all of them, may in combination serve to move the jet streams according to what we see them consistently do. The water content in the air, after all, is diamagnetic, right, guys? And I can certainly see that an ambient force with a flux velocity of 6 to 8.5 kilometers per second can easily cause large, lower pressure air masses to significantly accelerate across a slowly oscillating set of azimuths, if you know what I mean. So I'm hoping that everybody can see here what I'm driving at. And it's how I see the shape and the orientation of the ambient etheric field inclusively changing according to the aspect between the sun and the moon as they go around. So these red, green, orange, and blue curves will have a constantly changing amount of curvature based on this angle. So let's cover what some of those lines represent in relation to how we typically wind a toroid coil in the mainstream. And that brings us to this cute little diagram here. So typical windings is like the coil on the left here. Excuse me. Remembering the geometry of the right-hand rule, the axis of each turn is tangentially and essentially keeps to the inside of the core. You know what I mean? That the B field itself is going to be inside. It's going to be within the core material generated because of the coils on the outside. So as we begin to skew the direction of that B field, winding it like you see in the 2 o'clock position on this coil, the B field then begins to project farther outside the core and frankly inside, because it's still a dipole of sorts, right? So the coil below in this page, which is this guy here, that guy there, is also a Rodin coil, a Rodin coil style. And you can see how far skewed inward and outward the B field is here. You know what I mean? This angle is very much like this one. But the real difference between this and the green ones is that this is an air core. In turn, it has a higher inductive resonant frequency. It doesn't have an issue with the hysteretic resistance typically found inside a solid core material. So what I'm referring to here is the rate of magnetization and demagnetization of the core material itself and what it's capable of in terms of how high the frequency can be that you run through it. So needless to say, air operates at a much higher frequency than any solid mu metal or otherwise core material. The result is also that the coil's total inductive value is a fair bit smaller. And that means that you have to build them physically larger in order to have the same available amount of inductance and to work in the same frequency range as the other ones. But I digress. But from what I've seen in the YouTube world on this subject over the years regarding this thing here, I think the ball in the cup right here is actually a polarized magnet right through its center. So they hit the coil with a pulsed DC current, slowly in terms of frequency at first. And as they speed up the frequency, they manage to whip this thing's RPM up to around 50,000. And you should be able to find a video or two on this on YouTube still, which show this magnet spinning lethally fast and just as promptly jumping out of the cup and chaotically spinning around the room while it slows down. You know what I'm saying? So let's bring that thought about skew angle back to here, to the oscillating change in the geometry of the field in question. And I think that in total, with everything else we've talked about here, is the mechanism behind cyclic change in the directions and speeds of the jet stream. And I think that's something that constitutes an inclusively observable and measurable effect of the ether. What I can't really help you with is the subject of cause. And in this regard, I see my assertions as being essentially on par with most of the mainstream position on this and a plethora of other subjects. As someone who's only experienced life on the surface of Earth, I can't tell you how it has come to be that we have an ambient magnetic field, nor an electrostatic one for that matter. I can't see and measure enough of the system to know that much about the system. And the locations of where someone would have to go in order to properly examine the causes of those fields are well outside the areas that civilians are permitted and or able to go, you know. Nonetheless, this is a data set that I'd really like to see expanded upon to the degree where we see just how tightly these celestial and meteorological cycles adhere to one another. It could very well mean the change to the point that mainstream will have to change their position on all of it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it also.
What's that, Shane?
I'm gonna say it occurs to me that this could be some to do with the tidal forces too, because the tides are really solar and lunar proximity, not really gravitation. So when you're trying to draw the diagram and say that they're the dynamic cause of the influence, I think that would probably be a viable thing as well.
Yes and no. On the one side, I think it's right that we see a difference in behavior between salted and unsalted freshwater bodies of water, that only one of those two subsets are actually showing some kind of tidal motion, and it's the salted one, right? Now that part I kind of agree, but we can't ignore the sheer density of water and the mass of it. You know what I mean? That when we're talking about ether and upper atmosphere, above, 20,000, 40,000 feet, way above that, like double to triple that, that's where the jet stream really picks up speed. And I think it's because what you're trying to move up there is just a way lower density, that the same unit force per square meter is going to have a profoundly different effect on the air up there, or lack thereof, than it might on a body of water.
Well, sure,
Does that
but
make
if you go back to your red diagram, the one where you overlaid everything with the magnetic field, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you were to also add another layer that would do, say, tidal amplitude or even amphidromic points, I think you would see some suspicious correlation with what you outlaid there. So then,
but amphidromic points are static, though, aren't they?
They are,
Yeah.
but the effect on the tidal amplitude around them goes in such a way that it would fit in with the wind. Because the first thing I was looking at was wind and tides, right? Is it just the wind? Could it be the wind? And there is some correlation with wind currents and tidal nodes, but there's also more correlation with tidal nodes and placement of within the electric field. What I was using was Bob's winds for the flux area as well. That's what I was trying to hone in on.
Right. Magnetic flux area. Yeah, no, it's a really useful site. I like his data. Well, I wouldn't discard it out of hand. I'll say that much. And in turn, I would like to see those factors added to the data set to see if there is correlation. Yeah, I think it's worth it to look.
Yeah, that's as far as I went with it. I'm like, oh, that would look. I would want to look at that. Is what I thought when I was looking at your diagram. Yeah, like, ooh, that also piqued my interest.
In the interest of science, quite valid. I got no problem with that point at all. But
you could add another layer too for
what's that, Alan?
You could add another layer too for meteor showers, right, Shane?
Yeah,
those aren't those always on the other side of the sun or whatever? Like when you map.
Well, then you'd be adding
the coordinate though, so it's,
you'd be adding the auroras to the analysis.
Let's just add everything.
Lightning strike propensity. You know what I mean? We get into a lot of things. There's a lot of factors we got to mix in there, because this really is a composite. You know what I mean? I guess part of the shortcoming of the mainstream is narrow focus in the analysis for sake of, quote, simplicity for the undergrad. So they don't go insane, try to juggle too many variables at once, or for the academicians to even keep track of so many at once. It's a lot of hard work. I guess nobody is willing to do. But I'd like to see it done. But that does...
Your ability to visually represent it is wonderful, though, because you got like the gradient with the color, with the magnetic. You got the transition from the heat with the winds, and then the actual, like, you just do it so many different ways that it really paints like the best picture I've seen. And that, of
collective
course,
set of geometries. Yeah,
yep,
that's the cake taker right there, is it not? Yeah, thanks, man. I appreciate that. And that actually takes us to the end of what I want to present here today. I took you through the mechanisms. We did inductance, we did capacitance, we did light propagation, we did anisotropy, and then we did shaped, skewed, right-hand rule-ish, applying cyclically to a geometrical change over top of us. You know what I mean? As a combinative set of causal factors behind what's going on right over our heads all the time. People are looking for ether. Well, I think we're witnessing it right here. It's just that nobody's labeled it like that yet, I guess, other than me or someone else, maybe. I don't know. You might find these diagrams elsewhere. Somebody may have drawn them. I wouldn't...
Others have come to that same conclusion through different paths, I would say.
I would hope somebody did. I mean, I'm not that fucking bright. I would hope somebody else would come this far and say, hey, wait a minute, what about A and B and C and D together? What's that actually producing for us? Why wouldn't it be this? So how are things looking in the chat on YouTube and elsewhere if you're looking for questions?
Things are
questions,
looking good.
Comments?
Not seeing many in the question front, but there's some discussion at how cool the diagrams and such look.
Good. Very good.
Let's see. Yeah, if you guys have any questions for Stone about any parts of the presentation, I actually have one. When you were going over the Marinov motor, dude, it's been so long since we reviewed the Marinov motor. What was the purpose of him doing that again? Was it to make like infinite energy or back EMF or something? I forget.
It was actually supposed to be a way to eliminate back EMF as a back torque computational factor in terms of inducing torque to begin with per unit amperage. You know what I mean? Because that's all they really look at in motor dynamics. But yes, this thing about how they're inducing spin in the ring according to the blue, right? That it's doing a top view counterclockwise kind of thing based on positive coming in from this side, based on north being here and south being here, north here, south here, assuming some kind of B flux going this way and that way, which is totally not going on. Yeah, they're saying that this ring will spin with an absence of back EMF torque. But I personally, in replicating this and reading the papers, I don't see that anybody even got that far in their analysis to measure electrical back torque in this machine. They're all focused on how much torque it's not producing, which is why they went to the unit of measurement of dyne centimeters per amp.
Dude, I was about to say, hold on, man. They did measure 130 thousandths of a dyne or whatever. So
of a foot pound, yeah, of torque. Like, oh my god, that's more force. That's awesome. More force than 105 dyne centimeters of torque. But yeah, that was the point, to do it without any back EMF and somehow up the electrical efficiency of this motor. The Marinov motor.
Yeah. Dude, shout out to Marinov. Peace be upon him. He took an unfortunate accident out of the library window at his university.
It was a wild ride, guy, for the first 3 seconds.
All right. So we got... So do you want to close out on a video of the dissector capacitor?
Yeah, sure. You can just take right over and
awesome.
And show everybody that one, man. Go for it.
Awesome.
I'll stop sharing.
Well, thank you for the Prezi.
That's yours.
That was awesome. And that diagram, I'm gonna need a high definition picture of that.
You want to copy that?
I'm gonna need you to send that to me. That thing is pristine.
1995.
Dude, you know what? I'm gonna get that put on a tapestry, and it's gonna.
But on that note, because of other things that are going on in the netverse these days, I would comment on that. In that, for the record, I have never charged a dime for any information I have ever given out on any topic. Just so that it's been spoken and everybody understands it, that I'm not a money making grifter trying to get you guys.
Yeah, I don't think you understand.
I guess I am a grifter. I'm just selling the lie because I think it's fun or something. I don't know what that's about, but
we're all grifters because
I don't even need you to say anything anymore. I can just generate AI of you saying things. So
go for it. I'd like to see that. That'd be fun.
All right. So here I'm gonna screen share here. Hopefully
this hit it. Let's take apart a capacitor. Yeah.
Well,
yeah, man.
Okay, so we're gonna lose that and gain that. All right, you guys can turn your cameras and such off because it's not gonna display that one. I don't think. Nope, I lied.
I'll just stay muted. Whatever's up is up.
All right, cool. All right, here we go. This is a 20-minute video on the how a dissectable capacitor works, and what he goes over here is he goes over what they call free electron theory, which is what Stone and I were joking about earlier, how they say that the top plate, the charged plate is releasing an overspill of charged electrons onto the bottom plate, and those are just magically staying there on the plate. But what you can do is take the plate apart and discharge it, and there's nothing, you don't get shocked. But when you recombine it and everything, then you can discharge it. So the question of where's the energy stored is kind of what Stone was getting at, I believe, earlier. And it's not stored on the surface of the material. It's stored within
the potential gradient of the dielectric itself. Yes, indeed.
Yes, sir. So here we go. There's an awesome video from our boy It's BS. Check out his YouTube channel. He's got many in-depth breakdowns on relativity theory, quantum mechanics, and electricity. And he provides a bunch of sources and stuff and does his own thing. So check him out here. We'll go ahead and play this out. And then if there's anything you want to touch on as he goes through it, Stone, just tell me when to hit that pause button.
Yeah, will do.
Ben Franklin understood where the electrical energy was stored in a capacitor. His conclusion conflicts with how physics describes capacitors today.
Coming in?
No. You got to work some magic with that audio. I'm not hearing any of that.
Oh. All right. Second.
I think we're having one of them Linux issues again.
No, we're not having a Linux issue, but Shane, this video completely unrelated. Could you screen share this video for me?
Oh, unrelated. Now, what's the difference between
lost it in the clinch?
Just completely unrelated. Could be anything. Doesn't matter.
Swing and a miss. Everybody can adore my cat sleeping in the background over here.
Is that Mrs. Fluffernickel?
That's Ivy.
Ah,
she's my resident mass murderer.
Nice.
Security guard.
My favorite is like they kill and then they're not even hungry. I think they're the only animal that does that.
Oh, yeah.
Do it for sport.
That is handy.
That's gangster, dude.
It's good for the food budget, that's for sure.
Awesome. All right, here we go. So
do I have sound? Let's see. I wonder if
understood where.
Yep,
did I fix the problem immediately? Okay, I'm not going to say anything further.
Where the electrical energy was stored in a capacitor. His conclusion conflicts with how physics describes capacitors today. This video will describe that conflict and show you how to prove that Benjamin Franklin was right. This is the basic outline that we are going to follow. Now, why does it matter that we understand how a capacitor works? First of all, a capacitor is a very fundamental component in our electronics today. If we were to take the capacitors out of our phones, computers, cars, TVs, everything would stop working. And today, if we can better understand how to store electrical energy, it can help make improvements in our mobile electronic devices, our electric vehicles, and improve electrical storage on our power grid. Those are good practical examples. But when you better understand how a capacitor works, you can then apply it to nature and to physics, because these capacitor principles are fundamental to our electrophysical world. So let's take the periodic table and chop it into two pieces. For our discussion today, we only care about metals and nonmetals. And the words we will use for nonmetals are insulator or dielectric. So simply said in today's physics terms, metals are the wires that conduct the current, or inside those wires, the electron flow is the current. The insulator is the plastic coating around the wire, and it is used to help keep the wires from touching each other. And again, we're going to call that plastic insulator a dielectric. The first capacitor built is known as the Leyden jar. Let's take a look at how the Leyden jar is constructed. The Leyden jar typically used glass as an insulator between the two tinfoil layers. So in this case, the glass insulator is the dielectric material for this form of capacitor. A piece of metal was then pierced through the lid of the jar to make contact with the tin foil that lined the inside of the jar. This is a picture of two Leyden jar capacitors that were taken from the ship that saved passengers from the Titanic sinking. These capacitors were used in the radio system. The broken one on the right shows the inside construction of the jar, and typically it was filled with some type of water solution because you can see the corrosion on the copper wires. Now let's take a look at how electrical energy is stored in a capacitor. We have two conflicting viewpoints. So first, let's take a look at how Benjamin Franklin described where the electrical energy was stored in the Leyden jar. This is Benjamin Franklin's book on electricity. It was printed in 1751. On page 24, you will find his answer. So let's read this sentence. Thus the whole force of the bottle and power of giving a shock is in the glass itself. So it is clear that his conclusion is that the dielectric material held the electrical energy that produced the shock. In this case, the dielectric is the glass. The next sentence describes what the metal surfaces do. Back then, the metals were considered non-electrics, which seems a bit backwards using today's standards. You could just use the word non-dielectrics here. Back to the Wikipedia page, let's note that Ben Franklin was the inventor of the Leyden jar that could be taken apart into pieces, or it's now known as the dissectable Leyden jar. He also made the first parallel plate capacitors that could be pulled apart and inspected. So most likely these inventions helped him to conclude that the energy was stored in the dielectric. Now let's look at it from a physics point of view, which uses free electron theory to describe the energy storage of a capacitor. From a physics viewpoint, the energy of a capacitor is stored in the metal plates and not directly in the dielectric. We will use this FET simulation to help us understand the electron flow in this circuit. As we energize the wires by using a power source, such as this battery, notice that the two capacitor plates are accumulating charge. One is positive and one is negative. The idea is that the metal in the wires contain electrons that are free to move and flow from one plate to the other. This creates an electrical imbalance between the two plates. Since the electron is a negatively charged particle, the negative plate is filling up with electrons. This leaves the positive plate in a position where it is continually giving up electrons. Now we can add a dielectric material in between these plates if we like, and that changes the electrical capacity that can be stored. But if we remove the dielectric from this field, it should not have any charge on it, since the electric field is produced by the imbalance of this plate and this plate. So the real test of this free electron theory would be to remove the dielectric that's in this electric field and then use that same dielectric and discharge it using two different metal plates. Next, I will show you this type of demonstration, and the setup looks very similar to this. For the power generation source, I use what's called a Wimshurst machine. For my capacitor, I'm going to use a plastic Jif jar, and then we will discharge the capacitor using a fluorescent light bulb. Before I start my experiment, I will give you some other examples of dissectable Leyden jar videos. The first video is by Professor Julius Sumner Miller. You can search by the title of the video and then move forward to the 10-minute mark. This is where the Leyden jar demonstration starts, and even though he doesn't explain how it works, he suggests that any student that can explain it should get an A. The next video is from MIT professor Walter Lewin. His demonstration starts at the 39:30 mark. So in this third video, Professor Lewin gives his explanation to what's going on. If you go to the 32-minute 45-second mark in the video, he will justify his conclusion using math. And in my demonstrations, I will use different jar configurations to eliminate the theory that he suggests. And here are two videos that show the same test, except they use parallel plate capacitors instead of the Leyden jar. Okay, let's describe the lab setup. We have a Jif peanut butter jar. One electrode from the Wimshurst machine is attached to this piece of metal. So this acts as my top plate. It pierces through the plastic lid, and a small 12-gauge wire is hooked to it on the inside. This wire is bent so that the end is just barely above the surface of this liquid. The liquid is distilled water with a little bit of canola oil and some food coloring. Finally, the bottom plate here is just a backing plate to an electrical box, which is then connected to the other electrode of the Wimshurst machine. Over here we have a fluorescent light bulb and two alligator clips attached to this light bulb, and this is used to discharge the capacitor. So this first demonstration is just going to show you how I utilize all this equipment. First, I want to make sure that the Wimshurst machine is generating a charge. Now I'm charging up the capacitor using the Wimshurst machine.
Can you guys see the arcing across the top of the fluid inside? That he's giving it more than what it's actually rated to hold.
And now I'll take off the
terms of voltage.
electrodes and then discharge the energy that's stored in this capacitor.
Everything okay there?
Oh, my bad. I was like, are you saying that it has more? So you're saying he's overcharging it with the voltage and that's going to discharge into the capacitor at a higher rate? Or what?
Well, no, I'm saying that every capacitor, based on its construction and its dimensions, is rated to hold a certain amount of, quote, voltage, a certain amount of charge, a voltage state, so many volts, so to speak, between one and the other in terms of total potential. And in this case, he's using so many thousands of volts that in the center of the jar where the wire is not far enough away from any part of that foil, you know what I mean? That it's actually arcing and essentially failing as a capacitor while it's doing that. He's just hitting it a little too hard. That's all. Just checking at people.
The energy that
Okay. Because I saw it arcing and I was like, I didn't know what it meant.
stored in this capacitor. This is a screenshot of the capacitor discharging, and you can see the corona arc right there. The fluorescent light bulb lights up. There's light reflection off of the plastic jar, but if you look inside, you'll also see a discharge that comes off the liquid onto the copper wire. So the reason why I configure this jar with this dangling wire here is because I want to see the motion in the different dielectric solutions that I put into the jar, and I'll be able to see the reaction of the wire while I'm charging the jar. So for this next demonstration, I want to make sure that you realize I have two different plate sets. I'm going to charge up the jar using the plate set on the left, and then we'll take those off, push them to the side, and then utilize a completely different top and bottom plate to discharge it. Okay, this one's going to be in a darker environment so we can see the corona discharge throughout the experiment. Sorry for the annoying squeak on the Wimshurst machine.
Yeah, get some oil, buddy. Come on.
He says Windsurst machine like everyone knows what that is, but I'm assuming he's pedaling a
Okay, now
wheel.
we're going to remove the
No,
top
a Wimshurst
and bottom
machine
plate.
is just something that generates, much like a Van de Graaff generator.
Right, okay. That makes sense. The way that he can't see it and then like does it off screen, I picture him pedaling a really old bike and he's trying to physically generate the charge or whatever.
So there'll be no metal. Switch the jar over to a completely different set of plates.
Oh, so he's trying to show whether the charge is in fact held in the liquid, the dielectric that he made. Okay.
All new metal,
Or
and
the
then we're
jar
going to discharge
material.
it.
Yes, and possibly both.
Right. Oops.
And this should show that the energy of a capacitor is stored in the dielectric and not in the metal.
Well, look at that.
This is a screenshot of the capacitor discharge that we just saw. You can better see the corona discharge that happens inside the bottle. There are also small corona streamers that you can see coming up around the bottom of the container. And then the obvious discharge and the lighting of the lamp. This experiment is similar to the last one we did, but when we're charging this capacitor, what I'm trying to do is eliminate more of the metal. So you can see the bottom plate is now styrofoam and the electrode is just placed underneath the plastic jar. When we go to discharge, it will add back in a metal bottom plate, but we won't use the metal top plate.
I love how slow and highly calculated his movements are. This is a sign of somebody who knows what 20,000 volts feels like when you do the wrong thing.
Okay, so instead of putting back another top plate, what we're going to do is just put a wire inside of the jar and put the wire into the liquid, and then discharge it on the new bottom plate. So again, this shows that we've completely changed out all of the metal, but yet still get an electrical discharge from the plastic. And over here you can barely see the corona discharge from the copper wire that's down inside of the liquid. Okay, we're going to use a new jar for this test. And the idea is that we're going to try to insulate this jar as much as possible while we're charging it. This will be a direct challenge to MIT professor Walter Lewin's explanation on how the dissectable Leyden jar works. We need to minimize the amount of metal that is near this capacitor. This is so we can eliminate the idea of the metal spraying charge onto the capacitor. We're going to use an insulated wire, and the copper end that is inside the jar will be submerged in distilled water. The insulated wire will be going through this small hole at the top of the Jif jar. If you're unfamiliar with how good of an insulator distilled water is, I recommend that you watch this video from the Plasma channel. You can get a great understanding of how distilled water is a very good insulator and not a conductor of electricity. So we're keeping the room really dark so we can see if there's any corona discharge occurring. The only metal that I have on the bottom of this jar is the actual alligator clip from the windsurf machine.
That's what I was about to say, so I'm glad he did.
What is that? You see that?
Now we're going to add in metal in order to get this thing to discharge fast. So we're putting on one of the old tops, and we're going to replace the bottom styrofoam with one of the other metal plates. Again, that's so we can see the discharge.
So what is the effect?
So that eliminates the
insulator?
idea of metal spraying charge onto the jar. Now we see that dielectrics can store energy. Ben Franklin's idea that the energy was stored in the glass is correct. So for me, that does say that there's something wrong with the physics viewpoint. The free electron theory does not properly explain how energy is stored in a capacitor. And hopefully these demonstrations can help you figure out how to find that answer on your own. I bought this from eBay. It's a 9-inch Windsurf machine and shipped from China. It was like 50 bucks. If you're going to get into this, stay with the small stuff, small capacitors, because you will get shocked. And if you have small capacitors, it's not going to hurt as bad. Another device I have is a Thomas Kim electroscope. So I built this one based upon his design, and what's great is it shows the polarity of these dielectrics after you charge them. You can see the positive side on the bottom and the negative side on top. So the idea is to keep this as simple as possible and not require anything too fancy to be able to do these types of tests. This experiment was using canola oil as the liquid dielectric, and you'll see when it discharges it doesn't snap. In this one you can see the dielectric start climbing up the walls of the jar.
I think that's a function of permittivity.
This is a mixture of canola oil and distilled water.
When the liquid climbs up the sides, you think that's a permeability?
No, I meant the other part about how it slowly discharges. That's permittivity. That once
Oh,
it's charged up
right.
and he's discharging it, it takes a long time to bring its capacitance right actually down to quote zero or less than enough to light the bulb. Yeah, that's what's up there.
Right.
So to finish up the video, I can suggest the reading that I've been doing. We have to go back to 1861 with Clerk Maxwell's theory on dielectric displacement, and then we can continue forward through all the other great electricians. Eric Dollard is a contemporary electrician, and he is currently publishing books on his research.
Dude, what a G.
And the rest of those guys are his heroes.
Everybody should follow It's BS though. That dude's channel is awesome.
Dude, yeah, and if you have Twitter, follow him on Twitter. He posts tons of gems and comments on, mainstream science and just poking holes in it. And the responses he get are hilarious. So if you enjoy a good read of an endless back and forth with no resolution, my dude's got you on.
Before you get to it, no, he doesn't think the Earth's flat, but that's irrelevant to everything that he brings to the table. So don't be one of those guys.
As a final topic, I would postscript with the mention of the plasma physics guy and a video that he made, I think earlier this year, on how to build an electret. And that is akin to solid versions of the dielectric materials that he's using in these examples. That an electret is something that is a type of plastic, a synthetic, and you literally charge one side of it to the other side of it while it's cooling, essentially below its quote Curie point, although it's non-ferric, the equivalent of, moving from liquid to solid as it cools. If you do that in the presence of an electrostatic field, it will forever capture that gradient and function like that. So when he took his little meter at the end, the little pair of wires that will tell you all about the electrical field that's coming off of this capacitor, the electret will give you that constantly, forever, regardless of what you touch it on, or you know what I mean? You cannot, once it is solid and cooled, you cannot take the gradient out of it. It's a very unique kind of electric material in the universe, and far too little attention is being paid to it. Yeah, definitely check that out.
Well said. And yeah, that guy that made the static plastic thing is insane. Dude, when I saw that, I didn't know that was a possible thing, and it was just like, that blew my mind. Yeah, you definitely got to check that out. You can just make a static field magnet, essentially, or whatever. Just
Well, a static electrostatic potential magnet, kind of. Yeah, where the electrical lines of flux are there, that the electrical gradient is there, and you can always sense or measure that electrical field that is projecting out of it, similar to how a magnet has a magnetic field. Very similar animal. And so, hey, check YouTube. Any other questions coming out before we wrap this puppy up?
No, I think that's it. I think that's it. We'll just hit up the upcoming events. So tomorrow night we have Celestial Theodolite number 24 or 25. So we'll be getting into that. And then Tuesday will be a reading night. We're probably going to read the superluminal paper that Piezo found the other day. And then Wednesday, I'm going to be having a cosmological recap with Jaren from Jarenism, the flat earther formerly known as Jarenism or whatever.
The flat earther formerly known as Jaren. Yeah, that's what we should call him.
That's what we should call him. So no, but yeah, so we're gonna do a recap on the events since TFE, kind of going over some of the stuff that I've found and going over the measurements of the celestial theody as well. And then on Friday will be community Twitter night, obviously. And then Saturday, Shane and I will be debating some Czech lads on the celestial theodolite. They say,
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
they say that not only do they have refutations to it, but our entire premise is flawed, meaning the null hypothesis, we're misappropriating it somehow. So it'll be interesting to see what argumentation they come up with. So join us Saturday for that. And I think that'll be at 2 p.m. Eastern, if I'm not mistaken. And I often am. So good luck.
That one should be fun though, for real.
All right. Looking good.
All right. See you guys next week. Shane's going to be doing a presentation on Neptune, allegedly. Bye.